The rain hammered against the windows of JFK Airport as Ethan Cole boarded his flight to London that Thursday evening. Carrying more than just luggage, he carried the weight of a crumbling empire, a reputation built on lies, and a grief so crushing it had turned him into a ghost of the man he once was for 2 years. He'd been running from his daughter's death, from his failed marriage, from every mistake that had brought him to this moment. And as he collapsed into his business class seat, exhausted and hollow, he had no idea that a broken seatbelt, a terrified little girl, and 3 innocent words were about to crack open everything he'd been hiding. Because sometimes the person who saves you isn't a therapist or a mentor. Sometimes it's a 6-year-old with crayons who looks past your designer suit and asks the one question that changes everything. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday evening, turning the tarmac at JFK Airport into a mirror of gray clouds and distant city lights. Travelers hurried through the terminal with their heads down, dragging suitcases behind them, like burdens they wished they could leave behind. Among them walked a man who looked like he carried the weight of something far heavier than luggage. Ethan Cole moved through the crowd with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. At 38 years old, he had the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers and conference stages. Sharp jawline, carefully styled dark hair showing just the right amount of silver at the temples. Expensive suit that fit like it was painted on. But tonight, none of that polish could hide the exhaustion carved into every line of his face. He barely registered the other passengers as he made his way to the gate. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket, but he ignored it. Every call was another problem demanding his attention, another fire that needed putting out, another person who wanted something from him that he no longer had the strength to give. The flight to London was scheduled to depart at 9:45. Ethan arrived at the gate with 20 minutes to spare, though he couldn't remember the drive to the airport or checking his bags. The past week had blurred together into one endless stretch of sleepless nights and brutal meetings. His assistant had packed for him. His driver had brought him here. All Ethan had to do was keep moving forward, one foot in front of the other, until he reached whatever destination was supposed to make this all worth it. 2 flight attendants stood near the boarding door, their voices low but carrying in that particular way that told him they were talking about someone specific. Ethan had developed a 6th sense for when he was the subject of whispered conversations. "That's him," the younger one said, a blonde woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Ethan Cole. My boyfriend reads all those tech blogs, says he's a genius." "Genius or not, did you see what they're saying about his company?" the other attendant replied. She was older, with kind eyes that had probably seen every type of passenger imaginable. "Something about a humanitarian project that went sideways. People are calling for investigations. I heard he's ruthless. Built his whole empire by crushing anyone who got in his way." Ethan pretended not to hear them as he handed over his boarding pass. The older attendant gave him a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him. A ruthless genius? A man who'd lost his way? Or just another tired businessman flying across the ocean to escape something he couldn't name? Business class was half empty, which suited him fine. Ethan found his seat by the window and immediately closed his eyes, hoping the universal signal of "leave me alone" would be respected. It usually was. People in business class understood the unspoken rules about personal space and privacy. The boarding process continued around him. He heard families settling in, overhead compartments opening and closing, the quiet efficiency of the crew preparing for departure. Somewhere behind him, in the economy section, a child's voice rose above the ambient noise. "Mama, I don't want to. The plane is too high. Amira, baby, we talked about this. We have to visit Grandma, remember? She's waiting for us in London. But what if we fall?" Ethan opened his eyes despite himself. Through the gap between seats, he could see a young black woman crouched in the aisle, trying to soothe a little girl who looked about 6 years old. The woman had her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. There was something infinitely patient in the way she spoke to her daughter, a gentleness that made Ethan look away. He didn't want to think about that kind of love right now. It hurt too much. The announcement came for everyone to take their seats. The woman, Maya, finally got her daughter buckled in, though the little girl's hands gripped the armrests with white-knuckled intensity. Ethan turned back to his window and watched the ground crew moving around outside, preparing the plane for departure. The engines began their low rumble. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the safety demonstration started. Ethan had heard it so many times he could recite it in his sleep. He closed his eyes again, letting the familiar words wash over him without meaning. Then the turbulence hit. It wasn't unusual for takeoff, just a few bumps as the plane accelerated down the runway. But in the economy section, something went wrong. Ethan heard a metallic snap, followed by a child's frightened cry. "Amira!" Without thinking, Ethan twisted in his seat. The little girl had been thrown slightly forward as her seatbelt buckle gave way during the rough acceleration. She was sliding toward the gap between seats, her small hands grasping at nothing. Ethan's body moved before his mind could catch up. He reached through the gap, his hand catching the fabric of her sweater, steadying her until Maya could pull her back and hold her tight. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds, but in that moment, Ethan felt something crack open inside his chest. Some sealed-off place he'd been trying to ignore. "Oh my God," Maya breathed, clutching her daughter. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "She okay?" Ethan asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "I think so. The buckle it snapped right as we were taking off. I don't understand how that could happen." A flight attendant rushed over, the older one with the kind eyes. She assessed the situation quickly, her professional calm settling over the moment like a blanket. "Let me get you both moved. We have some empty seats in business class. You shouldn't have to worry about faulty equipment." Maya started to protest. "We can't afford." "No charge, ma'am. Safety issue. Please let me get you both settled somewhere better." 5 minutes later, Maya and Amira were seated directly across the aisle from Ethan. The little girl had stopped crying, but her eyes were still wide with fear. She stared at Ethan like he was some kind of puzzle she needed to solve. He tried to ignore her. He really did. But there was something unsettling about being studied so intently by a 6-year-old. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft, barely audible over the engine noise, but it cut through everything else like a knife. "You look tired, sir." Ethan blinked. Of all the things he'd expected her to say, that wasn't it. He let out a short laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Yeah, well, long week." "Amira," Maya said quickly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "That's not polite." "It's fine," Ethan said, and surprised himself by meaning it. When was the last time someone had been that honest with him? Everyone in his life either wanted something or was afraid of him. This little girl wanted nothing and feared nothing. She just saw what was right in front of her and said it out loud. "Sorry," Maya said anyway. "She doesn't really have a filter yet." "Most adults could use less filter," Ethan replied. He looked at Amira and tried on a smile. It felt strange on his face, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. "But yeah, you're right. I am tired." Amira seemed satisfied with this answer. She settled back into her seat, still watching him with those big, curious eyes. "My mama says sleep helps when you're tired. Your mama is very smart. She helps people who don't have homes. That's why we're going to London. She's going to talk to other people who help people." Ethan glanced at Maya, who looked like she wanted to disappear into her seat. There was something achingly familiar about that expression, about the way she held herself. Pride mixed with exhaustion, determination mixed with worry. He'd seen that look in the mirror enough times to recognize it. "That sounds like important work," he said. "It is." Amira's certainty was absolute. "Mama says everyone deserves a safe place to sleep." The plane leveled off, reaching its cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and the cabin settled into the quiet hum of a long flight. Other passengers were pulling out laptops and tablets, settling in with books or movies. Ethan should have done the same. He had work to do. Always work to do. His briefcase sat at his feet full of documents that required his attention. Instead, he watched as Amira pulled a small backpack onto her lap and extracted a worn notebook and a box of crayons. The box was missing several colors and the notebook's cover was held together with tape, but the little girl handled them like treasures. She selected a green crayon and began to draw, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration. Ethan found himself watching the way her small hand moved across the page, creating shapes and colors that only made sense in the logic of a child's imagination. After a few minutes, Amira looked up and caught him watching. Instead of being self-conscious, she smiled and held out the green crayon. "Color helps when the sky feels sad," she said simply. Ethan stared at the crayon like it was a foreign object. When was the last time he'd colored anything? 20 years? 30? He couldn't even remember. "I don't think I'm much of an artist," he said. "That's okay. You don't have to be good at it. You just have to do it." There was something profound in that statement, something that hit harder than it should have. Ethan took the crayon, holding it awkwardly between his fingers. It felt impossibly small, like trying to write with a toothpick. "Thank you," he said, and meant it more than she could possibly understand. He slipped the crayon into his shirt pocket, where it rested against his heart like a tiny green talisman. Maya was watching the exchange with an expression Ethan couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe, or concern, or just the wariness of a mother whose child was talking to a stranger, no matter how harmless that stranger appeared to be. "I'm sorry," she said again. "We're bothering you." "You're not." The words came out more forcefully than Ethan intended. He softened his tone. "Really, it's nice. Different from my usual flights. What do you usually do on flights?" "Work. Sleep. Avoid thinking about why I'm flying somewhere instead of staying home." Maya's expression shifted, something like understanding passing across her face. "I know that feeling." The cabin lights dimmed further as the crew prepared for the overnight portion of the flight. All around them, passengers were pulling out travel pillows and adjusting their seats. The two flight attendants from earlier passed by with a cart, offering drinks and headphones. Ethan ordered a whiskey. Neat. Maya asked for water and apple juice for Amira. They settled into a comfortable silence, the kind that forms between strangers who've shared a moment of minor crisis and come out the other side. Ethan closed his eyes, intending to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. It never did anymore. Not without the pills his doctor had prescribed and that he'd stopped taking because they made him feel even more disconnected from reality than he already was. Instead, he found himself listening to the quiet sounds of Maya and Amira settling in, the rustle of a blanket being spread, the soft murmur of a mother's voice reading a bedtime story, the gentle rhythm of comfort and safety that he'd once known and had somehow lost along the way. Hours passed. Most of the cabin fell asleep. Even Maya dozed off, her head resting against the window, her hand still holding Amira's. But the little girl was wide awake, staring at the seatback screen in front of her, where an animated movie played with the sound off. Ethan opened his eyes and found her looking at him. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "The plane is too loud." "Yeah, it is." "What do you do?" "For work, you mean?" She nodded. Ethan considered how to answer that question. How did you explain tech CEO to a 6-year-old? How did you break down the complexity of running a multinational corporation that developed artificial intelligence systems and data infrastructure for developing nations? I solve problems, he said finally. People bring me problems and I figure out how to fix them. Amira's eyes lit up. Like a superhero? The comparison made him laugh. A real laugh this time, not the bitter sound from earlier. Not quite. More like a fixer of problems. But not the exciting kind. Mama says all problems are exciting if you care about fixing them. Your mama is wise. What kind of problems do you fix? How could he explain that the problems he fixed weren't really problems at all, just obstacles to profit margins and shareholder returns? How could he tell this innocent child that his last major project, the one he'd been so proud of, had collapsed under the weight of its own moral bankruptcy? Complicated ones, he said. Technology problems, making sure computers and systems work the way they're supposed to. Oh, Amira seemed to consider this. Do you like it? The question caught him off guard. Did he like it? Once upon a time, maybe he had. Once upon a time, he'd believed he was changing the world, making it better, using technology to solve real problems that actually mattered. Now he wasn't sure what he believed. Sometimes, he said, which was the closest to honesty he could manage. Maya stirred slightly but didn't wake. Amira lowered her voice even more, leaning across the aisle conspiratorially. Mama works really hard, she whispered, but she likes helping people, even when it makes her tired. I can tell she loves what she does. She used to have a big office in a place called... Amira scrunched up her face, trying to remember. Africa. But then the money went away and we had to come home. Something cold settled in Ethan's stomach. The money went away. Mama says sometimes rich people change their minds about helping. She says we just have to work harder to find new rich people who care. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He knew exactly what had happened to Maya's program. He knew because he'd been in the room when the decision was made to cut funding to dozens of small non-profits that had been receiving grants from his company's humanitarian division. It had been presented as a necessary restructuring, a reallocation of resources to more profitable ventures. He'd signed off on it without even looking at the names of the organizations they were destroying. I'm sorry, he said, the words feeling inadequate and hollow. It's okay. Mama says we'll figure it out. We always do. Amira returned to her coloring, apparently done with the conversation. But Ethan couldn't move past it. He sat there in the dark cabin, surrounded by sleeping passengers, and felt the full weight of what his decisions had done to people like Maya and Amira. They weren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They weren't line items to be cut or resources to be reallocated. They were human beings doing good work, and he'd pulled the rug out from under them without a second thought. The green crayon in his pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Another hour passed. Amira finally fell asleep, curled up under a thin airline blanket with her notebook clutched to her chest. Ethan should have done the same. But instead, he found himself watching them. This mother and daughter who had somehow stumbled into his life at exactly the moment when he needed to remember that there were still good people in the world. Maya woke as they crossed the Atlantic. She blinked in the dim light, disoriented for a moment, then immediately checked on Amira. Satisfied that her daughter was sleeping soundly, she stretched as much as the airline seat would allow and glanced over at Ethan. You're still awake, she observed. Can't seem to turn my brain off. I know that feeling, too. She was quiet for a moment, then added, Thank you again for earlier. With the seatbelt, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there. Anyone would have done the same. Maybe, but you did it. She studied him with the same intensity her daughter had shown earlier. Amira was right, you know. You do look tired. More than just regular tired. Ethan wanted to deflect, to throw up his usual walls and change the subject. But something about the darkness and the isolation of being suspended in air somewhere over the ocean made him want to be honest. It's been a rough few months, he admitted. Work, work, life. The line between them got blurry somewhere along the way. He paused, then added, I used to think I knew what I was doing, building something important, making a difference. Now I'm not so sure anymore. Maya nodded slowly. I get that. I used to run a health outreach program in Uganda. We were doing real good, helping people who had nothing. Then the funding got pulled, and suddenly we couldn't help anyone. Had to close everything down and come back to the States. The knife of guilt twisted deeper. That must have been devastating. It was, but we're trying to rebuild. That's why I'm going to this conference in London, trying to make connections, find new funding sources. Start over. She smiled, but it was sad around the edges. My daughter thinks I'm some kind of hero. I don't have the heart to tell her I'm just making it up as I go along. She showed me her notebook earlier, the drawings. Oh, God. Maya covered her face with her hands. I'm sorry. She loves to share those with everyone. Don't be sorry. They were beautiful. Ethan hesitated, then added, there was one of her father. She said he was in heaven with wings. The sadness in Maya's smile deepened. James died 3 years ago. Car accident. Amira was only 3, so she doesn't remember him as well as I wish she did. But I try to keep his memory alive for her. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. Maya looked at him with those knowing eyes, and Ethan realized she could see right through his careful facade. You lost someone too, I can tell. The words stuck in his throat. He hadn't talked about Lily with anyone in months. His therapist had tried to get him to open up, but he'd stopped going to those sessions. His wife had begged him to grieve with her, but he'd pushed her away until she had no choice but to leave. Everyone in his life had tried to make him face what had happened, and he'd refused them all. But here, in the darkness, with a stranger who had no expectations and no agenda, the truth came out. My daughter, he said quietly. Sophie. She was 6, about Amira's age. Maya's hand moved toward his across the aisle, then stopped, respecting the space between them. What happened? Car accident, 2 years ago. I was supposed to be driving her to school that day, but I had an early meeting, so my wife took her instead. His voice was flat, emotionless, the only way he could get the words out. Someone ran a red light. Happened so fast they said she didn't feel anything. Oh, Ethan. Maya's voice was full of genuine compassion, not the hollow sympathy he'd grown to hate. I'm so sorry. I haven't been home in months. My wife and we couldn't figure out how to exist in the same space anymore. Everything reminded us of Sophie. So I threw myself into work, traveled constantly, tried to outrun it. Didn't work. Grief doesn't work like that. You can't run from it. It just waits for you to stop moving. Yeah, I'm starting to figure that out. They sat in silence for a while. 2 broken people suspended between continents, sharing their pain with an honesty that only seemed possible in moments like this. Ethan felt something shift inside him, some tiny crack in the armor he'd built around his heart. Does it get easier? He asked finally. The missing them? Maya thought about it before answering. It gets different. You learn to carry it better. Some days are harder than others, but then you have moments, little ones, where you remember them and smile instead of wanting to die. Those moments are worth holding on for. I can't remember the last time I smiled thinking about Sophie. All I feel is guilt. Guilt for what? For not being there. For choosing work over driving her to school. For being so wrapped up in my own importance that I couldn't see what mattered until it was too late. That's not fair to yourself. Maybe not, but it's true. Amira stirred in her sleep, making a small sound. Maya automatically reached over to adjust her blanket, her maternal instinct operating even while she was deep in conversation. The gesture made Ethan's chest ache. Sophie used to sleep like that, he said, all curled up like a little shrimp. She'd wake up with her hair going in every direction, and she'd come padding into our room at 6 in the morning wanting pancakes. What else do you remember about her? And just like that, Ethan found himself talking. Really talking, for the first time in 2 years. He told Maya about Sophie's obsession with dinosaurs, how she could name every species and correct adults when they got the prehistoric periods wrong. He told her about the way Sophie would sing in the bathtub, making up songs about soap bubbles and rubber ducks. He told her about her favorite bedtime story, the one he'd read so many times he still knew it by heart. Maya listened without interrupting, without offering empty platitudes or trying to fix anything. She just listened, and somehow that was exactly what Ethan needed. As he talked, he felt something loosening in his chest, some tight knot of pain that had been choking him for so long. He wasn't healed, not even close. But for the first time since Sophie died, he felt like maybe eventually he might be able to breathe again. "She sounds like she was an amazing kid," Maya said when he finally fell silent. She was. God, she really was. Ethan wiped at his eyes, surprised to find them wet. When had he started crying? "I don't deserve to remember her, not after what I've become." What you've become. Someone who doesn't care about anything except the bottom line. Someone who cuts funding to programs like yours without even thinking about the people it affects. Someone who's so wrapped up in his own pain that he forgets other people are hurting too. Maya was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "You know what I think? I think you care more than you want to admit. I think you're tired of pretending you don't. And I think meeting us today reminded you that there's a world outside your grief." "Maybe? Definitely." She smiled at him, and it was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Amira has a way of doing that to people, seeing right through to what matters. She told me color helps when the sky feels sad. That's her philosophy. Draw something beautiful when everything feels ugly. It's not a bad way to live. Ethan pulled the green crayon from his pocket and looked at it. In the dim cabin light, it seemed to glow, a tiny beacon of hope in the darkness. "I haven't thought about colors in a long time," he admitted. "Everything's been gray. Then maybe it's time to add some green back in." The plane droned on through the night, carrying them toward London and whatever waited there. Ethan didn't know what would happen when they landed. He didn't know if this moment of connection would fade as soon as they stepped back into the real world. But right now, in this small pocket of time and space, he felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. He felt like maybe he could be fixed. In the reflection of the dark window, Ethan caught a glimpse of his phone screen lighting up in his lap. He'd almost forgotten about it. A message had come through, encrypted, from an unknown number. He should have ignored it. Should have stayed in this moment with Maya and the memory of Sophie and the green crayon in his hand. But old habits died hard. He glanced down at the screen. The message was brief, just one line, but it sent ice through his veins. Project Nova Phase 2 will proceed regardless of casualties. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone. Project Nova. The humanitarian initiative that wasn't humanitarian at all. The program he'd tried to kill before leaving for London. The reason his board was furious with him. The reason his company was facing an ethics investigation. The reason he'd been getting death threats for the past 3 weeks. He'd thought he could escape it. He'd thought maybe, just maybe, he could leave it all behind and start fresh. But the past never stayed buried. It always found a way to rise up and drag you back down. Maya noticed the change in his expression. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," he lied. "Just work stuff, nothing important." But it was important. It was life and death important. And now sitting here with this woman whose life his company had already destroyed once, Ethan realized he had a choice to make. He could go back to being the man he'd been, the ruthless CEO who put profit over people. Or he could try to be the man Sophie would have wanted him to be, the man Amira seemed to think he could be, the fixer of problems. The plane began its descent toward London. Dawn was breaking somewhere below them, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Through the window, Ethan could see the first hints of morning light touching the clouds. Amira woke up and immediately looked over at him, rubbing her eyes. She smiled, that pure, uncomplicated smile of a child who sees the world exactly as it is. "The sky feels happy now," she said. Ethan looked out at the dawn and thought about green crayons and second chances and little girls who saw truth in tired faces. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think you're right." But as the plane touched down and the cabin erupted in the usual sounds of arrival, Ethan's phone buzzed again in his pocket. More messages, more demands, more reminders that the world he'd tried to escape was waiting for him on the ground. He just hoped he'd found enough light in the darkness to face it. The plane touched down at Heathrow just after 6 in the morning, London time. Ethan's phone had been buzzing non-stop since they entered British airspace, each vibration a reminder that the real world was waiting to reclaim him. He'd been staring out the window during the descent, watching the city spread out beneath them like a gray quilt stitched together with rivers and roads, trying to hold on to the fragile piece he'd found somewhere over the Atlantic. Maya stirred beside him in the aisle seat, gently waking Amira, who'd fallen back asleep during landing. The little girl blinked sleepily, her hair sticking up in all directions, clutching her notebook against her chest. "We're here, baby," Maya said softly. "Time to see Grandma." Amira yawned and looked over at Ethan. "Are you going to see your grandma too?" He couldn't help but smile. "No, sweetheart, I'm here for work." "Boring," she pronounced with the absolute certainty only a 6-year-old could muster. "Yeah," Ethan agreed. "Pretty boring." The cabin erupted into the familiar chaos of arrival. Passengers stood and stretched, reaching for overhead compartments, checking phones, preparing to step back into their lives. Ethan stayed seated a moment longer than necessary, watching Maya help Amira gather her crayons and put them carefully back in their box. He didn't want this to end. This brief window where he'd been just Ethan, not the CEO, not the widower, not the man whose company was imploding under the weight of its own corruption. Just a tired guy on a plane talking to a kind woman and her daughter. But all good things had to end eventually. They shuffled off the plane together, moving with the crowd through the jet bridge and into the terminal. Heathrow was already busy despite the early hour, filled with travelers from every corner of the world rushing toward their destinations. "Well," Maya said, shifting her carry-on bag higher on her shoulder, "I guess this is where we part ways." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw his assistant's name. Lena had been calling every 20 minutes for the past hour. He couldn't ignore her forever. "I should take this," he said apologetically. "Of course. Thank you again for everything. For catching Amira. For listening, for—" Maya trailed off, searching for the right words. "For being human." Something in those words hit him harder than they should have. Before he could respond, Amira stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around his legs in a quick, fierce hug. "Bye, Fixer Man," she said. "Don't forget to color." Then they were gone, disappearing into the crowd, and Ethan was alone again with his ringing phone and the weight of everything he'd been trying to escape. He answered, "Lena." Finally, his assistant's voice was sharp with stress. "Where have you been? I've been calling for hours." "On a plane. You know, the one you booked for me." "The board is going insane, Ethan. Walter's been calling every 30 minutes demanding to know when you'll be at the office. The shareholders are threatening to call an emergency vote, and the press got wind of something. They're starting to ask questions about Project Nova." Ethan closed his eyes and pressed his fingers against his temples. The headache that had been building since takeoff was now a full-blown migraine. "Tell Walter I'll be there by 9. He wants you there now. Then he can wait. I need to shower and change. I'm not walking into that building looking like I've been sleeping in airports." "Ethan, 9 o'clock, Lena. Not a minute sooner." He hung up before she could argue. The terminal stretched out before him, full of people with places to be and lives to live. Ethan stood in the middle of it all and felt completely untethered, like he might float away if he didn't anchor himself to something solid. He made his way toward customs, joining the long line of international arrivals waiting to be processed. His mind was already racing ahead, running through the conversations he'd need to have, the fires he'd need to put out, the damage control that would consume the next several days. That's when he heard it, Maya's voice rising in frustration somewhere ahead of him. "I don't understand. These are the same documents I used to enter the country last time. They're valid for another 8 months. Ethan craned his neck to see. Maya was at the customs desk, her paperwork spread out in front of her, while a stern-faced officer examined everything with suspicious thoroughness. Amira stood pressed against her mother's side, looking scared. "The visa allows tourism and personal visits," the officer was saying. "But according to these letters, you're here for a professional conference. That requires different documentation." "It's a charity conference," Maya explained, her voice tight with controlled panic. "I'm not being paid. I'm speaking on behalf of a non-profit organization." "Regardless, madam, I'm afraid I'll need to flag this for further review. Please step aside." Ethan didn't think. He just moved, cutting through the line with the kind of confidence that came from years of walking into rooms like he owned them. Several people shot him dirty looks, but he ignored them. "Excuse me," he said, approaching the customs desk. "Is there a problem?" The officer looked up, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Sir, you need to wait your turn in line." "I understand, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding. This woman is attending the Global Ethics and Humanitarian Summit. I'm one of the keynote speakers." The lie came smoothly, naturally. "She's part of my organization's delegation." Maya turned to stare at him, confusion and recognition warring on her face, but she was smart enough not to contradict him. The officer's expression shifted slightly, less hostile now. "And you can verify this?" "Absolutely." Ethan pulled out his phone and made a show of scrolling through emails. "I can have the conference organizers confirm her registration within minutes. Or we can stand here and debate visa classifications while my delegation misses their scheduled panels. Your choice." It was the voice he used in boardrooms when he needed someone to back down. Calm, reasonable, but with an undertone of steel that suggested crossing him would be unwise. The customs officer clearly recognized the tone of someone accustomed to getting what they wanted. "That won't be necessary," the officer said finally. He stamped Maya's documents with perhaps more force than needed. "Welcome to the United Kingdom." Maya gathered her papers with shaking hands, murmuring thanks, and pulled Amira away from the desk. Ethan followed them through customs, waiting until they were well clear before Maya rounded on him. "What was that?" she demanded, though her voice was more bewildered than angry. "You just lied to a customs officer. I solved a problem. That's what I do, remember? But you said you were a keynote speaker at the conference I'm attending. Are you actually going to be there?" Ethan hesitated. He hadn't planned on attending any charity conference. He had a company to save, a board to face down, a scandal to contain. But looking at Maya's face, seeing the stress and exhaustion there, he found himself nodding. "I'll make sure I am," he said. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "Maybe that's exactly why." He shifted his briefcase to his other hand. "Look, you helped me last night, more than you know. Let me return the favor." Maya studied him for a long moment, those intelligent eyes seeing more than he was comfortable with. "You're not just some random businessman, are you?" "No," Ethan admitted. "I'm not." "Should I be worried?" "Probably. But not about this. I'll make sure your conference credentials are sorted. I have people who can handle it." Amira tugged on her mother's hand. "Mama, I'm hungry." The tension broke. Maya sighed and ran a hand over her daughter's hair. "Okay, baby. Let's find some breakfast." She looked back at Ethan. "Thank you. Again. You seem to keep rescuing us. Maybe you keep rescuing me," Ethan said quietly. They parted ways outside the terminal, Maya and Amira climbing into a taxi headed for their hotel, while Ethan's driver pulled up in a sleek black car. He watched them drive away, Amira's small hand waving at him through the rear window, before sliding into his own vehicle. "Where to, Mr. Cole?" the driver asked. "The hotel. I need to clean up before heading to the office." As they pulled into London traffic, Ethan opened his briefcase. Tucked between folders marked Project Nova and Q4 financial projections was Amira's drawing, the stick figure version of him smiling under a rainbow. He stared at it for a long moment, then pulled out his laptop. He had work to do. By the time Ethan reached his penthouse suite at the Four Seasons, his mind was racing. He showered quickly, changed into a fresh suit, and sat down at the desk overlooking the Thames. The city spread out before him in the gray morning light, millions of people going about their lives, unaware of the battles being fought in corporate towers and conference rooms. He opened his laptop and pulled up the information his assistant had sent over. Board meetings scheduled for 2 that afternoon. Press inquiries flooding in about Project Nova. 3 major shareholders demanding immediate answers. A lawsuit filed by a coalition of African nations claiming data exploitation, and underneath all of it, that encrypted message from last night. Project Nova Phase 2 will proceed regardless of casualties. Ethan's hands hovered over the keyboard. Then, almost without conscious thought, he opened a new search window and typed in Maya's name. The results came up quickly. Dr. Maya Brooks, former director of the Uganda Health Initiative. Dozens of articles from 3 years ago about the innovative mobile clinic program she'd developed, bringing medical care to remote villages, glowing testimonials from people whose lives had been saved, awards from humanitarian organizations. Then the articles stopped. Just ended, right around the time his company had pulled their funding. Ethan dug deeper, using access codes he probably shouldn't have to pull up internal documents from his own company's archives. There it was, buried in a report marked Funding Reallocation Q2, 2023. The Uganda Health Initiative had been one of 47 organizations cut from their grant program. The reason listed was insufficient alignment with corporate objectives and strategic vision. No mention of the lives being saved. No acknowledgement of the work being done. Just a cold clinical assessment that the program didn't serve their bottom line. He'd signed the authorization. His signature was right there at the bottom of the page, dated and official. Ethan sat back in his chair feeling sick. Maya had been right there on that plane, sitting across the aisle from him, sharing her pain and her hopes. And the whole time he'd been the architect of her downfall, and she had no idea. His phone rang. Walter Pierce, the board chairman. Ethan let it go to voicemail. He couldn't deal with Walter's manipulations right now, not when he was staring at the proof of his own moral bankruptcy. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in years. He made a decision based on what was right rather than what was profitable. Ethan spent the next 2 hours making calls. He contacted the conference organizers and not only verified Maya's credentials, but secured her a spot on the main stage panel. He arranged for her organization to be featured in the conference materials. He even set up meetings with 3 major foundations that might be interested in funding her work. He did all of this without telling her, without expecting thanks, without looking for credit. He did it because it was the bare minimum of what he owed her. By the time he left for the office, his headache had returned with a vengeance. But beneath the pain was something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. The next 3 days passed in a blur of meetings and damage control. Ethan faced down the board, deflected questions from the press, and spent his nights in the hotel suite staring at financial documents and legal briefs. He didn't attend the charity conference. He told himself he was too busy, that he'd done enough by helping Maya behind the scenes. But the truth was simpler and more cowardly. He was afraid to face her, afraid she'd somehow figure out who he really was and what his company had done to her life's work. On the fourth day, he couldn't avoid it any longer. The Global Ethics and Humanitarian Summit was holding its closing session, and as a newly registered keynote sponsor, his absence would be noted. His assistant had scheduled him to make a brief appearance, shake some hands, and leave. Ethan arrived at the convention center in the afternoon, just as the main panel was beginning. The auditorium was packed with activists, non-profit workers, and philanthropists from around the world. He slipped in through a side entrance and found a seat in the back row, hoping to remain anonymous. The moderator was introducing the speakers. Ethan only half listened until he heard Maya's name. She walked onto the stage wearing a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, and even from this distance, Ethan could see she was nervous. She took her seat at the panel table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The topic was rebuilding trust after corporate exploitation in humanitarian work. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. The other panelists spoke first, offering diplomatic answers and carefully worded criticisms. Then it was Maya's turn. She leaned forward slightly, gripping the microphone. And when she spoke, her voice was clear and steady. "I used to believe that good intentions were enough," she began. "That if we just worked hard enough, cared deeply enough, we could overcome any obstacle. Then I watched a corporation that claimed to support humanitarian work cut funding to programs across Africa without warning or explanation. Clinics closed. Mobile health units stopped running. People died because someone in a boardroom decided we weren't profitable enough to matter." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. "But I'm not here to name names or point fingers," Maya continued. "I'm here to talk about what happens after betrayal. How do we rebuild? How do we trust again? Because the alternative is giving up. And the people we serve can't afford for us to give up." She went on, speaking from the heart about resilience and determination. She talked about the small victories, the lives still saved, the communities still served. She spoke about her daughter and the world she wanted Amira to grow up in. And with every word, Ethan felt the weight of his guilt growing heavier. As the panel ended and the audience applauded, Ethan knew he couldn't hide anymore. He had to face her, had to tell her the truth, had to accept whatever anger or hatred came his way, because he deserved it. He waited until the crowd cleared, then made his way backstage. Maya was gathering her notes, talking quietly with another panelist. When she looked up and saw him, her face lit up with genuine surprise. "Ethan, I didn't know you were here. I thought you said you were too busy with work." "I was, but I wanted to hear you speak." He paused, the words sticking in his throat. "You were incredible up there." "Thank you. That means a lot." She glanced around the empty backstage area. "Did you really arrange all those meetings for me? I had 3 foundations reach out this week, and they all mentioned your name. I made a few calls. A few calls that might save my organization." Maya's eyes were bright with emotion. "I can't thank you enough. You don't even know how much this means." "Maya, I need to tell you something." Ethan forced himself to meet her eyes. "I haven't been completely honest with you." Her smile faltered slightly. "What do you mean?" "My name isn't just Ethan. It's Ethan Cole. I'm the CEO of Novatech Industries." The color drained from Maya's face. She took a step back like he'd physically struck her. No, you can't be. I am. And I'm the one who signed off on cutting your funding 3 years ago." For a long moment, Maya just stared at him. Then her expression shifted from shock to understanding, to pure, blazing anger. "You." Her voice was barely a whisper. "You're the one who destroyed everything we built. Kids died, Ethan. Children who could have been saved if our clinics had stayed open. And you did that. You made that choice. I know, and I'm sorrier than you can possibly imagine." "Sorry?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think sorry fixes this? You think a few phone calls and some conference credentials make up for what you did? No, nothing makes up for it, I know that. Then why are you here? Why tell me now? To ease your conscience? To feel better about yourself before you go back to your corner office and your board meetings? Because I'm trying to make things right. Even as he said it, Ethan knew how pathetic it sounded. Because meeting you and Amira reminded me that there are real people behind every decision I make. Because I want to be better than I've been. Maya shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. I trusted you. I sat on that plane and opened up to you about my life, my work, my pain. And the whole time, you knew. You knew what your company had done to us, and you said nothing. I didn't know it was your program specifically until after we landed. But you're right, I should have told you immediately. Why didn't you? Because I'm a coward. Because I was afraid of exactly this, afraid of seeing the way you're looking at me right now. And how am I looking at you? Like I'm everything that's wrong with the world. And maybe I am. Maya wiped at her eyes angrily. I spoke about rebuilding trust up there, about moving forward despite betrayal, and you were sitting in the audience the whole time, knowing you were the one who betrayed us. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm telling you the truth. Because I want to help rebuild what I destroyed, not for credit, not for publicity, just because it's the right thing to do. The right thing. Maya's voice was bitter now. When did you suddenly develop a sense of right and wrong? Was it somewhere over the Atlantic? Or maybe it was when my 6-year-old daughter told you that you looked tired. The words hit like knives, each one deserved. I don't expect you to forgive me, Ethan said quietly. I don't even expect you to believe that I mean this. But I'm going to stop Project Nova. I'm going to expose what my company has been doing. And I'm going to make sure organizations like yours get the support they need, even if it costs me everything. Why should I believe you? Because I have nothing left to lose. My company's already investigating me. The board wants me gone. My reputation is destroyed. The only thing I have left is the chance to do something decent before it all falls apart. Maya looked at him for a long moment, and Ethan saw the war happening behind her eyes. Anger and hurt battling against the compassion that seemed to be at the core of who she was. Before she could respond, a small voice interrupted them. Mama? Why are you crying? They both turned to see Amira standing in the doorway, her notebook clutched to her chest, her face worried. Maya quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. I'm okay, baby. Just talking with Mr. Cole. Amira walked over to Ethan, studying his face with that same intense scrutiny from the plane. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a sticker, bright yellow with a smiley face on it. You look sad again, she said simply. This helps. She pressed the sticker onto his hand. You can fix things. Mama always says, broken things can be fixed if you care enough. Ethan looked down at the sticker, then at this little girl who somehow still believed in him despite everything. His throat tightened with emotion he couldn't name. Thank you, Amira, he managed. Maya pulled her daughter close, her eyes still hard when she looked at Ethan. We need to go. Come on, baby. But Mama, now Amira. As they walked away, Amira looked back over her shoulder and waved. Ethan raised his hand in return, the yellow sticker catching the yes light. He stood alone in the empty backstage area, surrounded by the detritus of the conference, and felt the full weight of his failures crushing down on him. He'd thought telling the truth would make him feel better, but it had only made things worse. That night, Ethan sat in his hotel suite and pulled out his phone. He opened his messages and found the last text his daughter Sophie had sent him before she died. He'd read it 1,000 times, torturing himself with the words, Daddy, when you fix things, can you fix me too? She'd sent it the morning of the accident, after he'd canceled another father-daughter breakfast to take a meeting. He'd been too busy to respond, too important, too focused on fixing problems that didn't matter instead of being there for the one person who did. He couldn't fix Sophie. She was gone, and no amount of guilt or regret would bring her back. But maybe, just maybe, he could fix this. He could stop Project Nova. He could help Maya and organizations like hers. He could become the person his daughter had believed he was. Ethan opened his laptop and began typing. Not a resignation letter, not this time. A detailed document outlining everything he knew about Project Nova, complete with financial records, internal memos, and evidence of the data exploitation happening in developing nations. He was going to burn his company to the ground if that's what it took to do the right thing. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Just 5 words that made his blood run cold. "We know what you're doing." Ethan stared at the message, then at the yellow sticker still on his hand. Amira's words echoed in his mind. "You can fix things." He hoped she was right, because tomorrow he was going to try to fix the biggest mistake of his life, even if it destroyed him in the process. He just had to survive long enough to see it through. The threatening text message kept Ethan awake through the night. By the time dawn broke over London, he'd compiled everything he could find on Project Nova into an encrypted folder on his laptop. Financial records showing how humanitarian aid money had been diverted into data harvesting operations. Internal emails where executives joked about exploiting villages that had no legal recourse. Video footage from test sites showing people being scanned without proper consent. Medical records that had been sold to pharmaceutical companies without patient knowledge. It was worse than he'd remembered. So much worse. Ethan showered and dressed in his sharpest suit, the armor he wore when he needed to feel in control. Today would be brutal. The board had called an emergency meeting for 10 in the morning, and every instinct told him they weren't planning to listen to reason. His phone rang as he was finishing his coffee. Lena, his assistant. "They know you're gathering evidence," she said without preamble. "I don't know how, but they know. Walter's been here since 6, meeting with security and legal. Let them know. I'm done hiding. Ethan, please think about this. If you go in there today, they're going to destroy you. They're going to try," he corrected. "But I have something they don't." "What's that?" "The truth." He hung up before she could argue further. The Novatech London headquarters was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in Canary Wharf, the kind of building designed to intimidate. Ethan had always loved this place, the way it announced power and success to everyone who saw it. Now it just looked cold. He walked through the lobby with his head high, ignoring the stares from employees who'd seen the rumors circulating online. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual, each floor ticking by like a countdown to something inevitable. The executive suite was buzzing with tension when he arrived. Assistants spoke in hushed voices, darting nervous glances at the closed conference room doors. Lena met him in the hallway, her face drawn with worry. "They're all in there," she said quietly. "All 12 board members. Walter brought his lawyer. This isn't a normal meeting, Ethan." "I know." He touched her shoulder briefly. "Thank you for the warning." "And Lena? Whatever happens in there, you didn't know anything about what I'm doing, understand? But I do know. I helped you book meetings, arrange travel. You followed orders from your boss, that's all. Don't let them make you a casualty of my choices." Before she could respond, the conference room doors opened. Walter Pierce stood there, his silver hair perfectly styled, his suit probably worth more than most people made in a month. He looked at Ethan with something close to contempt. "Nice of you to join us," Walter said. "We've been waiting." Ethan walked past him into the room. 12 board members sat around the massive table, their faces ranging from angry to disappointed to coldly neutral. These were people he'd worked with for years, people he'd made rich beyond measure, and every single one of them looked ready to tear him apart. "Sit down, Ethan," Walter commanded, taking his place at the head of the table. "I'll stand, thanks. This isn't a negotiation. You're right, it's not." Ethan set his briefcase on the table but didn't open it. "Because I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to tell you that Project Nova ends today." The room erupted. Voices overlapped, all of them demanding explanations, threatening consequences, calling him insane. Walter slammed his hand on the table, silencing them. "You don't have the authority to shut down anything," Walter said, his voice dangerously quiet. Especially not the project that's generated more revenue this quarter than any other initiative we've launched. Revenue from selling people's medical data without consent, from harvesting biometric information from communities too poor to fight back, from turning humanitarian aid into a cover story for exploitation. Ethan's voice was steady, calm. That's what Project Nova really is, and all of you know it. Careful, Ethan. This came from Richard Caldwell, the CFO who'd been with the company since its founding. You're making serious accusations. I'm stating facts. I have the documentation to prove every word. Walter leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan like he was a mildly interesting problem to solve. Let me tell you what I think happened. I think our CEO had a breakdown. Too much stress, too much travel, not enough sleep. So he started seeing conspiracies where there were none. Started believing his own company was some kind of evil empire, instead of the innovative force for good that it actually is. Is that the story you're going to sell? Ethan asked. It's the truth. And when you walked into that charity conference and started making wild promises to organizations we'd rightfully cut from our budget, you proved you'd lost perspective. You can't separate your personal feelings from business decisions anymore. My personal feelings? Ethan's control slipped slightly. You mean my conscience. The part of me that remembers we're supposed to help people, not exploit them. We do help people, Walter snapped. Novatech has revolutionized healthcare access in dozens of countries. We've brought technology to places that had nothing. The fact that we also profit from that work doesn't make us evil. It makes us sustainable. Tell that to the villages where people's medical records were sold to insurance companies that then denied them coverage. Tell that to the families who trusted us with their data and watched it get weaponized against them. Clark Davis, the current CFO who'd replaced Richard, spoke up. Even if what you're saying is true, and I'm not conceding that it is, you can't just shut down a multi-billion-dollar operation because you suddenly developed ethics. Thousands of jobs depend on Project Nova. Pension funds have invested in our stock based on its success. You'd be destroying people's livelihoods. I'd be stopping us from destroying people's lives. Walter stood, his face flushed with anger. Enough. We didn't call you here for a debate about corporate morality. We called you here to accept reality. You're unfit to lead this company. Your judgment is compromised. Your decision-making is erratic. And based on the psych evaluation we requested from your doctor, you're suffering from acute stress disorder and possible depression. Ethan's blood went cold. You had no right to access my medical records. We had every right. You're the face of this company. Your mental health is a legitimate concern for the board and shareholders. What you're doing is illegal. What we're doing is protecting Novatech from a CEO who's gone rogue. Walter pushed a folder across the table. Sign the retirement papers. Take the severance package. Walk away quietly, and we'll make sure you're remembered as a visionary who built something incredible and then had the wisdom to step aside. And if I refuse, then we destroy you. We leak those psych evaluations to the press. We paint you as a paranoid burnout who couldn't handle the pressure. We bury you so deep in lawsuits and investigations that you'll spend the next decade fighting just to stay out of prison. Walter's smile was cruel. Your choice. Ethan looked around the table at these people he'd once considered colleagues, maybe even friends. They stared back with cold calculation, waiting to see if he'd fold. He thought about Maya's face when he'd told her the truth, the betrayal in her eyes, the way Amira had still given him that sticker despite everything, believing he could fix things. No, Ethan said simply. No, Walter repeated, as if he couldn't believe what he'd heard. I won't sign. I won't walk away. And I won't let Project Nova continue. Ethan opened his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. This contains every piece of evidence I've gathered about what we've really been doing. Financial records, internal communications, video footage, all of it. And tomorrow morning, I'm giving it to Oliver Grant at The Guardian. He's been investigating corporate exploitation in Africa for years. He'll know exactly what to do with this. The room exploded into chaos. Board members shouting, lawyers on phones, Walter's face turning a dangerous shade of red. Security was called. Threats were made. But Ethan just stood there, holding that little USB drive, feeling more certain than he had about anything in years. "You're done," Walter finally said, his voice shaking with rage. "Not just at this company. Everywhere. We'll make sure no one ever trusts you again. We'll take everything you have." "You can't take what I've already lost," Ethan replied quietly. "Take the company. Take the money. Take whatever you want. But you won't take this." He pocketed the USB drive. "Project Nova ends, or I expose every single one of you." He walked out of that conference room with his head high, even as security followed close behind. He could hear Walter screaming orders, hear phones ringing, hear the machine of corporate power gearing up to crush him. But for the first time in 2 years, Ethan felt like he could breathe. The next few hours were a blur. Ethan was escorted from the building, his access credentials revoked, his company email shut down. By the time he made it back to his hotel, the first media reports were already hitting. Novatech CEO forced out amid mental health concerns. Ethan Cole suffers breakdown, removed from leadership. Clark had moved fast, leaking a carefully constructed narrative to friendly journalists. Ethan was portrayed as unstable, paranoid, unable to handle the pressure of running a major corporation. Anonymous sources close to the board expressed concern for his well-being while praising the board's swift action to protect the company. His phone exploded with calls and messages, reporters wanting statements, colleagues distancing themselves, investors demanding answers. He ignored them all. Instead, Ethan packed a single bag with essentials and checked out of the Four Seasons. If Walter's threats were serious, and Ethan had no doubt they were, then staying in an obvious location was foolish. He needed to disappear, at least until he could meet with Oliver Grant and turn over the evidence. He found a small safe house in East London, arranged through a contact who owed him a favor, and knew how to stay quiet. It was nothing like the luxury he was used to. Just a bare apartment with basic furniture, a laptop, and a door that locked. But it was anonymous, and right now that was worth more than comfort. Ethan sat on the worn couch and pulled out his phone. He needed to contact Maya, to warn her that things were about to get much worse before they got better. But when he pulled up her number, his finger hovered over the call button without pressing it. What could he possibly say? That he'd started a war with his own company and she might get caught in the crossfire? That he was trying to make things right but might end up making them worse? That he was sorry, again, for everything? Before he could decide, someone knocked on the door. Ethan froze. No one should know he was here. No one except his contact, and they'd been clear about not making unexpected visits. He approached the door carefully. "Who is it?" "It's Maya." Ethan's heart stuttered. He opened the door to find her standing in the hallway, Amira's hand held tightly in hers. Maya's face was set in determined lines, but her eyes were red like she'd been crying. "How did you find me?" he asked. "I have friends who know people. Turns out, when a tech CEO goes into hiding, word spreads in certain circles." She walked past him into the apartment, pulling Amira with her. "We need to talk. Maya, you shouldn't be here. It's not safe." "Nowhere is safe right now, Ethan. I've been getting calls all day. Reporters asking about my connection to you. Anonymous messages warning me to stay quiet. Someone even showed up at our hotel, asking questions about what we discussed on the plane." Guilt crashed over him. "I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. Too late for that." Maya settled Amira on the couch with her notebook and crayons, then turned to face Ethan. "I saw the news. What they're saying about you. And I did some research of my own. Maya, I know about Project Nova. The real story, not the PR version. I have contacts in Uganda who told me what actually happened in those villages. The data collection, the privacy violations, the way your company used humanitarian cover to exploit vulnerable people." Her voice shook with anger. You knew about this. You led this. I did. There was no point in denying it, and I'm trying to stop it. By destroying yourself in the process, if that's what it takes. Maya stared at him for a long moment. I spent all night trying to decide if I believe you. If this is real or just another manipulation. And you want to know what made me come here? What? Amira. She woke up this morning and the first thing she asked was whether you were okay. Said she had a bad dream that you were in trouble. Maya's expression softened slightly. My daughter has good instincts about people, better than mine, apparently. I don't deserve her faith in me. No, you don't. But you're trying to earn it anyway, and that counts for something. She pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. I have evidence, too. Testimony from clinic workers about what happened when your company showed up. Medical records that went missing. Data breaches that were never reported. I've been collecting it for 3 years, hoping someone would listen. Ethan looked at the files on her phone, his chest tight. Why are you showing me this? Because I'm angry at you, Ethan. Furious. What your company did destroyed years of my work and cost lives. But I'm also angry at a system that lets companies like yours operate with impunity, and if we're going to take them down, we need to do it together. You want to help me? I want to help the people who can't help themselves. If that means working with you, then fine. But understand this, I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it because it's right. I understand. Good. So what's the plan? Ethan pulled out his laptop and showed her everything he'd compiled. They spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing his documentation with her evidence, building a case that was ironclad. Maya was meticulous, asking sharp questions, pointing out gaps in the narrative, strengthening the story. Amira colored quietly on the couch, occasionally looking up to watch them work. At one point, she brought Ethan one of her drawings, a picture of 3 people holding hands under a bright sun. That's me, Mama, and you, she explained. We're a team. We are, Ethan agreed, his throat tight. As evening fell, Maya's phone rang. She answered, listened for a moment, then her face went pale. We have to go, she said urgently. Now. What's wrong? That was a friend from the conference. Someone's been asking about us, specifically about me and you together. They're offering money for information. Ethan's stomach dropped. They're looking for leverage. If they can connect us, they can use you against me. Or use you against me, Maya countered. She grabbed Amira's backpack and started packing up the crayons. Either way, we need to get somewhere safer. I have a contact. Oliver Grant, the journalist. He has a secure location where whistleblowers can stay while preparing stories. If we can get there, then let's go. They left the safe house within minutes, Ethan carrying his laptop and nothing else. Maya held Amira's hand tightly as they made their way down the back stairs and out into the London evening. Rain had started falling, turning the streets slick and gray. They caught a taxi and gave the driver an address 3 blocks from where they actually needed to go, then walked the rest of the way. Oliver Grant's place turned out to be a nondescript flat above a Vietnamese restaurant in Shoreditch. The journalist himself answered the door, a man in his 40s with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers. Cole, he said, looking Ethan up and down. I've been waiting for you to come to your senses. What took so long? Had to gather my courage. And you brought company. Oliver's eyes moved to Maya and Amira. This must be quite a story. It is, Maya said firmly, and I'm telling it with him. Oliver stepped aside to let them in. Then I'd better make some coffee. This is going to be a long night. As they settled into the cramped flat, Ethan pulled out the yellow sticker Amira had given him days ago. It was crumpled now, the adhesive barely holding, but the smiley face was still visible. Maya noticed him looking at it. She really believes in you, you know. Keeps telling me that you're a fixer man, and fixers make things better. I hope she's right. So do I. Maya's expression was complicated, anger and hope and determination all mixed together. Because if we fail, if they bury us both, I need to know it was worth it. It will be, I promise you that. Outside the window, London stretched out in the darkness, millions of lights marking millions of lives. Somewhere in that vast city, Walter and the board were planning their next move. Somewhere, people were suffering because of decisions Ethan had made. But here, in this small flat with a journalist who believed in truth, and a woman who believed in justice, and a little girl who still believed broken things could be fixed, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. His phone buzzed one more time. Another threatening message, this one more specific. "You won't leave London alive." Ethan showed it to Maya. She read it, then met his eyes steadily. "Then we'd better make sure the truth gets out before they stop us," she said. Amira looked up from her coloring. "Don't give up, Fixer Man." Ethan smiled at her, real and genuine. "I won't, kiddo, I promise." They had one night to prepare their case. One night to turn evidence into an exposé that would shake Novatech to its foundations. One night to make sure that if they went down, they took the whole corrupt system with them. Ethan opened his laptop, and together with Maya and Oliver, he began to write the story that would either redeem him or destroy him. He was finally ready to face the consequences of his choices. They worked through the night, fueled by coffee and determination. Oliver Grant proved to be a meticulous editor, pushing Ethan and Maya to back up every claim with documentation, to anticipate every counter-argument the board might raise. By dawn, they had something powerful, something undeniable. The Global Ethics Summit's closing keynote was scheduled for 2 that afternoon. Ethan had been registered as a last-minute addition to the speaker roster weeks ago, before everything had fallen apart. Walter and the board assumed he'd never show up, not after being publicly humiliated and forced out. They'd probably already prepared a replacement speaker. That was their mistake. "You're really going to do this?" Oliver asked as morning light filtered through the apartment windows. "Walk into a room full of people who think you've lost your mind and expose your own company?" "That's exactly what I'm going to do," Ethan replied. He looked at Maya, who was helping Amira get ready for the day. "Unless you think I shouldn't." Maya met his eyes. The anger from days ago had settled into something more complicated. Acceptance mixed with wariness. "I think you should do what you know is right. But Ethan, once you start this, there's no going back. I know. They'll come after you with everything they have. Legal battles, character assassination, maybe worse." She glanced at her daughter, lowering her voice. "That text you got last night wasn't just intimidation. I know that too." Ethan touched his jacket pocket where the USB drive sat, a small weight that felt heavy as the world. "But if I don't do this, nothing changes. Project Nova continues. More people get exploited, and I stay the person I've been for the last 2 years. Someone who knows what's right but doesn't have the courage to fight for it." Amira looked up from her coloring. "Are you going to fix the big problem today?" "I'm going to try, sweetheart." "Good. Mama says trying is the bravest thing." She held up her latest drawing, stick figures on a stage with a crowd watching. "That's you talking to all the people. You're going to tell them the truth." The simple faith in her voice nearly broke him. "What if they don't want to hear it?" "Then you talk louder," Amira said matter-of-factly, returning to her crayons. Oliver packed up his recording equipment. "I'll be in the audience, live-streaming everything. The moment you start presenting that evidence, it goes public. Even if they try to shut you down, the story will already be out there." "What about security?" "Walter will have people watching." "Let him watch. This is a public summit with international press coverage. If they try anything physical, they'll only make things worse for themselves." Oliver paused. "Though I'd feel better if you had someone watching your back." "I'll be there," Maya said firmly. "Amira and I will be in the audience. If nothing else, seeing us might remind you why you're doing this." Ethan wanted to argue, to tell her it was too dangerous to bring her daughter to something that could turn violent. But he also knew that Maya had made her choice, and she had every right to see this through. Her work had been destroyed by his company. She deserved to witness its reckoning. They left the flat separately, taking different routes to the convention center. Ethan wore his best suit again, armor for battle. He carried only his phone, the USB drive, and Amira's yellow sticker, which he'd carefully placed in his wallet, next to Sophie's picture. The Thames Exhibition Center was already packed when Ethan arrived. Security was heavy at the entrances, with metal detectors and bag checks. He spotted several men in suits who looked more like corporate security than event staff. Walter's people, no doubt, watching for him. Ethan walked through the main entrance with his head high. He saw the moment they recognized him, saw them speaking urgently into radios. But they couldn't stop him. Not here. Not publicly. He had a valid speaker credential, and this was an open event. The main auditorium was a massive space with glass walls overlooking the river. Tiered seating held hundreds of attendees from across the globe, activists and philanthropists, journalists and diplomats. The stage was set with a podium, a large projection screen, and cameras recording everything. Maya and Amira were already seated near the middle, anonymous in the crowd. Oliver had positioned himself strategically with his camera, looking like any other journalist covering the event. Backstage, Ethan was met by a flustered conference organizer. "Mr. Cole, we weren't expecting you. Given the recent news about your departure from Novatech, we assumed. I'm still scheduled to speak, aren't I?" "Well, yes, but the board sent a representative to deliver remarks on behalf of the company instead. Walter Pierce is here. Then you'll have two perspectives. Isn't that what ethical discourse is about?" Ethan's smile was cold. "I believe in transparency." The organizer looked uncomfortable but nodded. "You're scheduled after the lunch break. 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Ethan stood in the wings, watching other speakers deliver their presentations about corporate responsibility and ethical innovation. The irony was almost too much to bear. Then Walter appeared. He looked every inch the corporate statesman in his tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. When he saw Ethan, his expression turned poisonous. "You shouldn't be here," Walter said quietly, moving close enough that only Ethan could hear. "We had an understanding. No, you had demands, I had different plans. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. We've already prepared a response. Your credibility is destroyed. No one will believe a word you say. Then you have nothing to worry about." Walter's jaw tightened. "This is your last chance to walk away. Take it, or I promise you'll regret it. I already have more regrets than I can carry. What's one more?" Before Walter could respond, the conference host was introducing the next speaker. Ethan's heart hammered as his name echoed through the auditorium. This was it. No turning back now. He walked onto the stage to scattered, uncertain applause. The audience didn't know what to expect. Half of them had probably read the news articles painting him as unstable. The other half were just curious about the drama. Ethan reached the podium and looked out over the sea of faces. He found Maya and Amira. The little girl waved at him, her smile bright and encouraging. Maya's expression was more guarded, but she nodded once. A permission, or maybe just acknowledgement. "Thank you for having me," Ethan began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "I'm sure many of you have read the reports about my recent departure from Novatech. About my supposed breakdown, my inability to handle pressure, my paranoid accusations against the company I built." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. In the wings, he could see Walter watching with barely concealed rage. "I'm here to tell you that those reports are lies. Carefully constructed lies designed to discredit me before I could tell you the truth about what Novatech has really been doing under the banner of humanitarian work." The murmuring grew louder. Ethan pulled out a small remote and clicked it. The massive screen behind him flickered to life. "This is Project Nova," he said. "Novatech's flagship initiative, supposedly bringing healthcare technology to underserved communities across Africa and Southeast Asia. That's what we told the world. That's what I believed we were doing. The screen showed promotional materials, smiling children receiving medical care, villages celebrating new clinics, all the glossy PR that had won them awards and acclaim. But this is what Project Nova actually was. The image changed. Internal documents appeared. Financial records showing money flowing into data harvesting operations rather than healthcare. Emails discussing how to maximize profit from biometric collection. Video footage from hidden cameras showing people being scanned without proper consent. Their medical information cataloged and sold. The auditorium erupted. Gasps and angry voices filled the space. Journalists were already typing furiously on their phones and laptops. Oliver's live stream viewer count was climbing rapidly. We told these communities we were helping them, Ethan continued, his voice rising over the chaos. We promised healthcare, education, support, and we did provide some of that, just enough to maintain cover while we exploited them. We collected their data, sold their medical records to pharmaceutical companies, used their biometric information for facial recognition software. We turned human beings into products. The screen continued cycling through evidence, each image more damning than the last. Village leaders who'd tried to complain and were ignored. Children whose health data was sold before they were old enough to consent. Families torn apart when insurance companies denied coverage based on information Novatech had provided. Walter was shouting something from the wings. Security was moving toward the stage. But Oliver's live stream had already gone viral, hundreds of thousands of viewers watching in real time. There was no stopping this now. I signed off on these programs, Ethan said, his voice cracking with emotion. I approved the budgets, authorized the expansion, celebrated the profits. I told myself we were doing good work, that the ends justified the means. I was wrong, and people died because of my choices. Maya was standing now, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of sadness, Ethan realized, but of vindication. Of finally being believed after years of trying to tell people what had happened. The board of Novatech knew about all of this. They approved it. They profited from it. And when I tried to stop it, they tried to destroy me. They leaked false information about my mental health, violated doctor-patient confidentiality, threatened my life. Ethan pulled out his phone and displayed the threatening text on the screen. This message came yesterday. You won't leave London alive, because the truth is more dangerous to them than any competitor, any market downturn, any scandal. Security guards had reached the stage now, but they hesitated. The entire world was watching. Every major news outlet was picking up Oliver's live stream. Arresting Ethan in front of this audience would only confirm everything he was saying. Walter appeared on stage, his face red with fury. Shut it down. Shut everything down now. You can shut down this presentation, Ethan said calmly. But you can't shut down the truth. Copies of all this evidence have already been sent to regulatory agencies in 12 countries, to the International Criminal Court, to every major news organization. It's over, Walter. Project Nova is finished. Walter lunged forward, and for a moment, Ethan thought the man might actually attack him physically. Security moved to restrain Walter instead, holding him back as he shouted threats and accusations. The auditorium was in complete chaos now. Diplomats were making urgent phone calls, activists were cheering, journalists were scrambling to file breaking news stories, and through it all, Ethan stood at the podium, feeling strangely calm. He looked out at Maya and Amira one last time. The little girl was clutching her mother's hand, her eyes wide but not frightened. She smiled at him and made a thumbs-up gesture. I can't undo the harm I've caused, Ethan said into the microphone, his voice quiet now but still carrying. I can't bring back the people who died because of my negligence, but I can make sure it stops. I can make sure the truth comes out. And I can spend whatever time I have left trying to be the person I should have been all along. Police officers were entering the auditorium now, real police rather than private security. They made their way to the stage with purpose, but they walked past Ethan and went straight to Walter, who was still shouting. "Walter Pierce," one officer said clearly. "You're under arrest on multiple charges including fraud, data privacy violations, and conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. You have the right to remain silent." As they read Walter his rights and led him away in handcuffs, the room erupted again. This time, with applause, genuine and thunderous. Ethan stood there, overwhelmed by the noise, by the magnitude of what had just happened. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. His legs gave out. He collapsed at the podium, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was, how much adrenaline had been carrying him. Paramedics rushed forward, but Ethan waved them away. "I'm fine," he managed, "just tired." Maya was there suddenly, having fought her way through the crowd. She knelt beside him, her hands on his shoulders. "You did it. Oh my God, Ethan. You actually did it." "We did it," he corrected. "Your evidence, your testimony. I couldn't have done this without you." Amira squeezed between them, throwing her small arms around Ethan's neck. "You fixed it. You fixed the big problem." Ethan held her, this child who'd seen something in him he'd forgotten existed, and finally let himself cry. Not tears of grief or guilt, but of relief, of release, of redemption earned through the hardest thing he'd ever done. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Ethan testified before Parliament, speaking calmly about the systematic exploitation Project Nova had enabled. He faced civil lawsuits and criminal investigations with quiet acceptance. He sold his remaining company stock and donated the proceeds to organizations working to rebuild the programs Novatech had destroyed. The headlines were brutal at first. Tech's CEO admits to massive fraud. Novatech scandal rocks industry. But gradually, the narrative shifted. Whistleblower takes down own company to expose corruption. Former CEO's redemption through truth. Maya's charity received funding again, this time from multiple sources who wanted to support her work. She was offered a position directing an international coalition for ethical technology implementation. She accepted, with the condition that she could still spend time with the communities she served. Ethan faced accountability for his role in Project Nova. He pled guilty to negligence charges and received a suspended sentence, community service, and permanent bans from serving on corporate boards. He accepted it all without complaint. It was less than he deserved and more than he'd hoped for. On a clear morning 3 months after the summit, Ethan stood outside a small flat in London's East End. It was nothing like the penthouse he'd once called home, just 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and windows that overlooked a busy street rather than a river view. It was perfect. He'd taken a consulting position with several ethical technology startups, teaching them what not to do, how to build something good without losing sight of why it mattered. The pay was a fraction of what he'd once made, but he didn't need much anymore. His phone rang. Maya's name appeared on the screen. "Hey," he answered. "How's the trip?" "Exhausting, but good. We just finished setting up the new clinic in Uganda, same village where the old one used to be." Her voice was warm, happy. "They remembered me, Ethan. After all these years, they remembered and welcomed us back. That's wonderful. Amira wants to talk to you. Hold on." A moment later, the little girl's voice came through, bright with excitement. "Mr. Ethan, guess what? I drew a picture of the new clinic and everyone signed it. I can't wait to see it. Are you coming to visit? Mama says maybe you can come help teach people about the computers. Maybe soon, kiddo. I have to finish some work here first." "Okay. Don't forget to color when the sky feels sad." "I won't, promise." Maya came back on the line. "She misses you. We both do. I miss you too." Ethan paused, then added quietly, "Thank you, Maya, for believing I could change, for giving me the chance to try. You earned it, but Ethan, don't think you're done earning it. Redemption isn't a destination, it's a practice." "I know. I'll keep practicing." After they hung up, Ethan walked to his small desk where two drawings sat in simple frames. On the left was one of Amira's pictures, the stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. On the right was Sophie's old drawing from years ago, faded but carefully preserved. He touched both frames gently, remembering. The daughter he'd lost, and the girl who'd helped him find his way back. Different children, but both teachers in their own way. His laptop sat open with a draft document on screen. He was writing about corporate ethics, about the temptations of profit over principle, about how easy it was to lose yourself in pursuit of success. Maybe it would become a book, maybe just a series of lectures. Either way, it felt important to share what he'd learned, even if it was painful to revisit. Ethan pulled out his wallet and looked at the yellow sticker, still there after all these months. The smiley face had faded but was still visible. Next to it was the green crayon Amira had given him on the plane, carefully wrapped in tissue paper. Simple gifts from a child who'd seen past his exhaustion and his guilt to the person he could still become. He looked out the window at the London street below. People hurried past, caught up in their own lives and struggles. Somewhere among them were people he'd hurt through his decisions, people whose data had been exploited, whose trust had been betrayed. He couldn't fix everything, couldn't make everyone whole again, but he could keep trying. One day at a time, one decision at a time, one moment of choosing right over easy. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Another tech company was under investigation for privacy violations. The industry was changing, slowly but surely. The expose had started conversations about corporate responsibility, about ethical innovation, about remembering that technology served people rather than the other way around. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Ethan closed his laptop and grabbed his jacket. He had a meeting with a startup founder who wanted advice on building ethical data practices into their company from the beginning. It was the kind of work that mattered, even if it didn't come with the prestige or the paycheck he'd once chased. As he stepped outside into the afternoon sun, Ethan looked up at the sky. It was bright and clear, not a cloud in sight. London's typical gray had given way to brilliant blue. He smiled, remembering Amira's words from that first flight, from when all of this had begun with a simple observation from a tired child to an exhausted man. "The sky feels happy again," he said quietly to himself, and for the first time in years he realized it was true. Not just the sky, but him. He was happy. Not the shallow satisfaction of closing a deal or the temporary high of success, but the deep, genuine contentment of knowing he was finally living with integrity. Sophie would have been proud of him. He hoped she was watching somehow, seeing that her dad had finally learned what she'd tried to teach him in that last text message. That fixing things meant more than solving problems. It meant fixing yourself first, being brave enough to admit when you were wrong, and strong enough to make it right. Ethan walked down the street, just another person in the crowd, no longer a titan of industry or a disgraced CEO. Just a man trying to be better than he'd been, one day at a time. The green crayon was still in his pocket. The yellow sticker was still in his wallet, and in his heart, carried alongside the grief that would never fully fade, was gratitude. Gratitude for a little girl who'd offered him a crayon and told him colors helped when the sky felt sad. Gratitude for a mother who'd forgiven him enough to let him earn redemption. Gratitude for second chances, even when they came wrapped in consequences and hard truths. He'd lost almost everything. His company, his reputation, his fortune. But in losing it all, he'd found something more valuable. He'd found himself again. And the sky, impossibly blue above London's ancient streets, seemed to smile down on him as he walked toward whatever came next. The fixer man had finally fixed the most broken thing of all, himself. When the world tells you that success means power and profit, Will you have the courage to redefine what truly matters before it's too late? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge us to be better than we were yesterday.